Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first IGS BS session. We're really looking forward to tonight's visit and hoping to have some interaction with all of you who have joined us. My name is Jackie Atkins. I'm the Director of Science and Education at the ASA and have had the privilege of getting more involved in IGS in the last few years, and I really, really enjoy the work that I've been able to do with what we call IGS, the International Genetic Solutions Collaborative Group. And one of the things that I've been involved in here recently with IGS is we have an education committee. And one of the concepts that came out of that education committee is to start hosting some IGS webinars. And so tonight is the first one. You're lucky to hear it. We will record this. We will make it available after the fact. But it's the first of several to come. And so we're planning to host more of these. We've got the next one set for Thursday, July 16th. At 5 p.m. Mountain. And one of the things that we want to do with these is to just have some fun and have some conversation. And we set this at 5 o'clock Mountain, so it can be a bit of a happy hour. And so if you want to crack a cold one, or, pour some bubbly or whatever suits your fancy, and just sit back and enjoy the conversation, and please send questions. And because of the size of this, if you have a question, what we'd ask you to do is there's a little question mark box that you can click on. And if you click on that, then I know that you can just send me a quick message that says, "Hey, Jackie, I'd like to talk." And I can then unmute you and give you some audio control. Outside of that, we ask people to stay muted, and I am going to unmute any of the staff of our IGS partners and make it so that you have audio control yourself. So in just a second, we'll get onto that. So the whole point of tonight is not to hear Jackie talk about how to ask questions on a GoToWebinar. The whole point of tonight is to hear from some of the people at the very heart of IGS and really the philosophy of IGS and why breed associations would want to work together instead of compete against each other. And I think you'll hear, and I think you'll see some evidence that by working together, we are all better and we all have better tools. And the really cool thing about being involved in the IGS collaboration is this group of individuals all care about the same mission, which is to make better selection tools for the beef cattle industry. And we really have the beef cattle industry in our hearts, and we want the beef cattle industry to be successful. So with that, we've got two gentlemen who are willing to visit with us tonight, eager to visit with us tonight. We've got Wade Shafer, who is the CEO of the American Simmental Association and has been for the past 7 years. Prior to being the CEO, Wade was the COO and the Director of Breed Improvement before that. Wade's a unique individual because he was a seed stock breeder, and he's been in those shoes, and he has had to make those decisions, and he's had bull sales, and he's gone through what our members are going through. But not only that, he's got a master's and a PhD in animal breeding from Colorado State, and has a real interest in finance and business. And so he's a really unique individual to be able to lead the American Simmental Association. And he's really been, one of the main architects of IGS. And along with Wade, we also have Tom Brink. And speaking of architects of IGS, the Red Angus Association of America and the American Simmental Association were really the first two partners in this collaboration. And so we've been working with Red Angus for many years now, and Tom is also no stranger in the beef industry. Tom has been CEO of Red Angus since 2015. And prior to that, many of you would know him through his work with JBS Five Rivers, founder and president of Top Dollar Angus, and carries with him a wealth of knowledge for the beef industry. He is also very thoughtful and well-spoken, and I think tonight will be offer his wisdom to us. So with that, we'll get rolling with Dr. Wade Shafer to kick this off.
Thank you, Jackie. As Dr. Atkins said, this is the inaugural session of what we plan to have as a series of these happy hours. Of course, we're relegated to hosting them virtually, as we are with most events that go on these days. We actually hosted a live happy hour at BIF last year, and we were very pleased with that. A lot of positive interaction at that event, and we fully intended to host another one this year. Of course, that just wasn't in the cards under the current circumstances. And actually, the desire of as Jackie said, she chairs an education committee for IGS. The desire to host these virtual happy hours probably was rooted in the fact that we really felt that the live happy hour we had last year at BIF was very, very valuable. And as she said, she's aptly dubbed these things BS sessions. We want them to be casual. I want them to be interactive, and as she said, I'll provide some insight about IGS from my perspective, and then I'll pass the baton over to Tom Brink, the CEO of Red Angus, to get insight from his vantage point. So I'll start with a little bit of nostalgia. This slide was my title slide that I gave at a talk when we first went down this path of collaboration. As Jackie said, it was the Red Angus Association of America and the American Simmental Association joining forces. It's called exactly as it said on the slide, the Red Angus, the Simmental Joint Multi-Breed Genetic Evaluation. This talk was given in 2010, and because I was in Fort Collins, Colorado, I used a place that I really spent a fair bit of time at, and that's Poudre Canyon. And if any of you have driven on Highway 14 going up Poudre Canyon, you will know that there is a tunnel that is carved right through the rock to get through a large mountain there. And at the time, I really didn't have any insight. I just thought, well, heck, I'm in Fort Collins. It's where I went to school, and I spent a lot of time in Poudre Canyon. So I used that as the title slide, and it actually turned out to be, looking at it 10 years later, it turns out to be a pretty fitting picture, as we really didn't know what was on the other side of this joint multi-breed venture that we undertook at the time. So this is actually the other side of that tunnel that goes up to Poudre Canyon. And now we know what is on the other side, and that is this concept that we call IGS, or International Genetic Solutions. So it was not named IGS initially. Just a point of trivia, the name was actually coined by our former employee, Will Townsend, and it was a number of years after we launched the joint venture with Red Angus. He just felt it needed to be a little sexier, and so we came up with, or Will came up with the name International Genetic Solutions. So I'm often asked, what is IGS? And there's a lot of different perceptions and conceptions of what IGS is, but I always use this description, and I think it does a pretty good job of describing the heart of IGS, and I call it an unprecedented collaboration between progressive breed associations to enhance beef industry profitability. And I always, being from Minnesota, I always have to apologize for using such a braggadocious word as unprecedented. Given the industry we're in, I'll show you the next slide, the industry we're in, it's really not bragging. Though the level of collaboration that we're undertaking under the umbrella of IGS, I think would be impressive in most any industry out there. So, as most of you know that have seen my slide sets, I like to depict things graphically because I think it gets a message across more effectively. At least it does for me. And so I think it's fair to say that prior to IGS, the level of collaboration was somewhat like that. There were essentially walls built between all these associations and breeds. And in my opinion, I guess at the root of that would be that I think associations tended to and still do tend to put their interests above the interest of the industry. And I'm not living in a glass house there. I know we at the ASA from time to time could be accused of being guilty of that as well. I think we've tended to spend a lot of our time and resources trying to convince the industry how great we are, and oftentimes that has kind of taken our eye off the ball of what is the most important, and that is improving the commercial industry, the profit in the commercial industry via genetics. And I think it's also safe to say that IGS has essentially blown that wall to smithereens. And again, I don't think that is an outlandish statement. I think we have, at the level of collaboration we're operating at now, we have simply smashed down the walls. I'm not saying there still aren't some walls, but we've certainly gone a long ways towards minimizing those walls. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. I'm going to show you a slide of the title or the front cover of a magazine called The Economist. It's actually printed over in the UK, or it's published over in the UK. You see over on the right-hand side, you've got a bunch of oil derricks, and the article inside made the statement that by their market value, Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft are the world's most valuable companies. And I think the reason they put them on oil derricks is because it was quite a paradigm shift, because not too long ago, oil companies, based on their stock valuation, tend to be the largest companies in the world. And the article went on to state that all of these companies have something in common, and that is this, that data is their lifeblood. And I think that's a fair assessment. All those companies are tech companies, and they use data in various ways in their business model to propel themselves forward. So when it comes to data being the lifeblood, of those companies, I think it's fair to say that we can make the same statement that data is the lifeblood of genetic improvement. And when it comes to IGS, I think it's also fair to say that no one has more of it. So we are, just to give you a current snapshot of where IGS is at, we currently have 17 independent organizations, and I say organizations now, I can't say breed associations because we have added a very valuable partner, and that would be Neogen or GeneSeq, and we truly value them being part of the collaboration. And that collaboration is now the world's largest genetic evaluation. We have pushing 19 plus million animals, and with some of the breed associations who are in the queue to join in the relatively near future, we're probably going to, it looks like we're going to be pushing over 20 million animals. So it's a substantial database. We bring in somewhere north now of 380,000 animals per year. And we're sitting at more than, I haven't updated this slide. I'd have to talk to Dr. Sachi Body about where we're at now, but at the time I put this slide together, we were at somewhere north of 260,000 genotypes. So this is a bar graph that shows the contribution by partners to the IGS database. And I think those of us over on the right-hand side might tend to kind of stick our chest out and think, boy, we sure bring a lot to the table. And then we certainly do. As you move from left to right, there's more information coming in from those databases. But if we take a look at the total, we actually take a look at the total, I think it's fair to say we all pale in comparison. So it's really through collaboration, this idea of breaking down the wall and working together that leads us to the world's largest database. And as I mentioned, data is the lifeblood of genetic evaluation. So, as I said, if data is the lifeblood of genetic improvement, I think it's fair to say, as I said, IGS has more of it. But I think it's also fair to say that no one uses it more effectively. Actually, if we go back in time, I think it's fair to say that the seeds of IGS were planted back in 1997. And that was also a collaborative effort. That collaboration was between the American Semitole Association and Cornell University. And that collaboration yielded the world's first multi-breed genetic evaluation performed on a large database. So to show you the value of that, I'm going to use data that was pulled from our IGS database. And I'm using this because about a week ago, I gave a virtual talk to the Red Angus board. And turns out that in the Red Angus database, there are over 7,000 sires that have progeny in the Red Angus database, as well as having progeny in at least one of the other databases in the IGS partnership. So if we go down, if we look at the number of progeny that were sired by those 7,000 plus animals in Red Angus, we see there's somewhat north of 600,000 progeny. Now, if we look at those same 7,000 sires, if we look at the number of progeny they have distributed throughout our partners database, we see a pretty dramatic revelation, and that is that by incorporating, using multi-breed evaluation that was developed through the collaboration that I pointed to in the previous slide, we essentially have our Red Angus has tripled the amount of information, so that would be doubled the amount of information. We went from, if it was Red Angus only, those 7,000 sires would have somewhat, as I said, somewhat north of 600,000 progeny. But if we look at the total, or no, actually does. I'm sorry about that. It does triple. The total I gave you, or the total I'm showing you on the slide, is the total solely for the partner databases. So if you look at that, it does show that Red Angus has in fact tripled the amount of information, or we have tripled the amount of information on those 7,000 animals that are in the Red Angus database. And as I said, I think it's fair to say that the seeds of IGS were that multi-breed capability, because we could not contemplate evaluating a database with so many breeds and combinations of breeds without having multi-breed capability. So that's why I think it's very fair to call that collaboration the seeds that resulted in IGS down the road many years. So as far as using the data more effectively, as I have shown earlier in the past couple slides, there's no doubt that multi-breed capability was crucial to that, to using that data effectively, because it would be impossible to analyze all those different databases without having multi-breed capability. But another area that over the last years we have evolved to, so we can actually use the data more effectively, is the area of genomics. And I think it's fair to say that up until more recently, the labs were quite a ways ahead of the software that was needed to incorporate the methodology to use the information the labs were producing. With that in mind, we, IGS, initiated Operation Quantum Leap. And the goal of that was to create a software platform that maximized the value of DNA for genetic prediction, and do so in a manner that we can leverage that for years to come. And that was initiated in January of 2014, and we completed that project in May of 2018. That prior to that time, as I said, we simply did not have the kind of software that could leverage the methodology that was out there to analyze the DNA that was coming through the system, and now coming through like a fire hose pouring out water. So anyway, we went from this IGS multi-breed genetic evaluation to the IGS multi-breed genetic evaluation powered by Volt. And Bolt is a software platform. I want to make that clear. It is not a methodology. I think some confuse Bolt with a methodology, but it actually is just a software platform. I say just, it's an extremely powerful software platform. But what it does is it provides a very flexible platform that allows for a wide array of methodology to be performed. Be performed on huge data sets, which is certainly in our situation a requirement. It can perform methodology that prior to the creation of the Bolt software, it can use methodology that was seen to be untenable, things that were just impossible to do on a very large database. The flexibility component of Bolt is so valuable because it allows us, we know that we're very much on uncharted territory. Most of the things that are going on in the world of genomics in relation to genetic evaluation, we are blazing trails. And those trails will take us down different paths. There's no question about it. But because Bolt has the kind of flexibility that allows for us to go down very different paths, it will make the transition that is inevitable over time fairly seamless. So I think it's fair to say that due to the fact that we have the largest database in the world across when it comes to genetic evaluation of beef cattle, and we're leveraging that information as effectively as possible, I think it's fair to assess that this IGS multi-breed evaluation powered by Bolt is the largest and most powerful system in the world. So what is the future? What lies ahead for IGS in the future? Well, I think we certainly want to ramp up collaboration in other areas. I have focused almost entirely, well, I have focused entirely on genetic evaluation, but there certainly are other areas that breed associations can break down walls and collaborate that would be beneficial to not only the industry, also beneficial to breed associations, in my opinion. For example, we've had joint seminars. This happened to be a picture that was taken back in 16 in Mandan. We had a joint seminar between Galvey and Red Angus and Semitone. We've had events at BIF fairly routinely. This was one in Manhattan in 2016. We collaborate on booth space at NCBA, and we also have collaborated in the area of youth development. This is a picture of a group of multi-breed youth, breeds coming from multiple breed associations at a summit that was held down in Fort Worth back when you could actually gather, back in 2018. So I say all that, and I really am passionate and very hopeful that we can ramp up our efforts in these areas that are outside the bounds of genetic evaluation, because I think we could benefit the industry, and the associations can benefit from that as well. But I would close by saying that perhaps the most important thing of all when it comes to the future of our industry, the seed stock industry specifically, beef cattle seed stock industry, really is going to reside in our ability to round up data. And I'm really pleased, and I'd say even proud, that the IGS partners are stepping up to the plate. There's many different strategies and programs that are being implemented by the various breed associations that operate under the umbrella of IGS. And it really has resonated with increased phenotypic and genotypic flow. And I think what we just need to keep in mind as we move along in this venture is that we're all in this for the industry, and we're all in it together. And because of that, we just are. We feel we're leveraging the resources that we collectively have much more effectively. We're leveraging them much more effectively because we're doing it collectively. So with that, I'll pass the baton over to Tom. He has been a very valuable partner. Red Angus has been an extremely valuable partner in this venture that has gone on now for over a decade.
Well, good evening, everyone. And Wade, thank you for that. I think it's amazing. And of course, if you know Wade Shafer, he's got a very calm demeanor, and he can present something that is extremely amazing and unprecedented, as he said, in a calm and very down-to-earth way. But I think it's good for us all to reflect a little bit on what he just said. It's absolutely amazing that in a relatively short period of time, IGS has come as far as it has come. The involvement of now 17 breeds and more growth ahead. The data, the numbers that you saw, and what is really happening there in terms of the size and sophistication of this analysis is truly unprecedented in the industry in terms of what it is, and also as Dr. Shafer said, the way that the breeds are working together, the example that is setting for the industry, and the value to the commercial cattle producer is truly unprecedented as well. I wanted to make just a few comments. I won't talk very long here. We want to open it up for questions fairly quickly here. But it might be worthwhile to think about why an individual breed, why any of the 17 breeds maybe, would be part of IGS. And I think for us at Red Angus, and most of these reasons will probably fit virtually all of the breeds that are part of IGS, but I want to kind of answer that from a Red Angus perspective. It'll ring true again for most all of the breeds. Number one would be, and Dr. Shafer spoke very well to this, is it easily accomplishes much more than we could do on our own. You saw the numbers. You saw the tripling of the amount of data that is available on those 7,000 Red Angus sires. There's so much connectivity between the breeds, and data is power. Data is accuracy on those EPDs. Data gives you, especially when it's across multiple breeds, you get to test your genetics, not just in a straight bred setting, but in a crossbred setting as well. All those things go way beyond what any single breed could do on their own. And so that's a big, big reason, of course, why Red Angus is part of IGS. I think the other reason is that we do believe in crossbreeding. We understand the importance of crossbreeding to the commercial cattle producer, been measured, been quantified. It's actually a core policy of the Red Angus Association, has been for many years. And so that part as well was a natural fit for us to join a group like IGS to help found that group and stay with it, support it as it grew. It's something that we really believe in. And I think, again, I can speak for the breeds that are involved in IGS, they have the same attitude. And really it is about, finally, I guess the third reason would be, it's about the commercial cattle industry. If we want to be more successful as breeders, as associations, as breeds, we have got to make our commercial industry more profitable and more prosperous, and allowing them to have the best selection tools available across these many breeds, and allowing them to select cattle on the same base is, again, using Wade's word, it's unprecedented and it's very powerful. It makes the selection process much more user friendly. And so those are some good reasons. They probably wouldn't even complete the list, but 3 big reasons why Red Angus is part of IGS. And I think, again, I can speak for virtually all of the other breeds involved. They would probably say the same thing. Let me also compliment the American Simmental Association for their leadership in IGS. They have done a great job and been pioneers, and I thank them, and we really enjoy working with ASA, with Dr. Shafer and his team, as well as all the other breeds. I think we've had some tremendous, and Wade showed just a little bit of it in a few of those last slides, but we have had some tremendous discussions in working together. We face similar challenges. We serve the same customers by and large, and so working together is really a way that we can accomplish so much more. And you know, I can't help but think also about how what we're doing in IGS in working together, working collaboratively, is an example for the entire industry, because our industry, as everyone on this call knows, is a pretty segmented industry too. And so we need to break down those walls. I liked Wade's illustration of blowing up that brick wall and really starting to collaborate. We need to do that as breeds, and we're doing that more and more through IGS. We also need to do that as different segments of the industry, because we are challenged. We have a lot of external challenges. We sure don't need to add to that in our industry by fighting each other between the segments. And so I hope that everybody on the call this evening, number one, thanks again for joining. We look forward to some discussion here and some questions, but I hope that you can take away from this just how big and powerful this evaluation has become. And it is the largest in the world, as Dr. Shafer has said. And we really believe it's the place to be. We really believe there's no other place that really any breed can go and get what we're getting through IGS. So thank you for allowing me to be part of this. Wade, thanks for giving me a few minutes to speak here. And we'll go back then, I think, to Jackie and start taking some questions.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. That was a great way to kick it off, and we have gotten some questions. So one of the questions that has come in, and if, you know, you can always just let me know if you would like to talk. You can hit the question mark and say, hey, Jackie, I'd like the mic. But if you type in a question, I'm happy to relay it for you. So one of the first questions that has come in is, how is heterosis accounted for in the IGS system? And that's a great question, because of course, one of the big philosophies and messages that we all support and try and spread is the importance of crossbreeding. And if you're going to have crossbreeding and you're going to have some hybrid vigor, that can get noisy with a genetic evaluation. And so that's definitely been a focus of the multi-breed genetic evaluation. So Wade, would that be a question to head your way?
So what's the specific question?
How is heterosis accounted for in the IGS system?
Okay, so we, as Jackie said, when it comes to genetic evaluation, heterosis can actually be seen as a cloud that you want to clear away. What we're after when we do a genetic evaluation is the animal's genetic value independent of heterosis, as you all probably well know. And so the way we deal with that is we adjust for it. We can, through statistical methodology, we can account for the level of heterosis in a mating or in an animal, and consequently work through the statistically use methodology that actually clears that cloud away, where we can get at the animal's genetic merit independent of heterosis, or independent of what it's mated to. Because heterosis, of course, is entirely predicated on what the animal is mated to, because it's the pairing of the the effect of the pairing of the genes. So that's how we do it. We use statistical methodology, and it's been employed for many years and very well tested. Now, as time goes on, we're probably going to get even more refined. We can now look under the hood a lot more than we could in the past. We used, frankly, we've been using average level of heterosis, which based on a mating, which we know is going to vary across animals with the same pedigrees and breed combinations, and with genomics, we will be able to, and we can. Neogen's already got a product out that is actually estimating various levels of heterosis based on genomic information.
Thanks, Wade. We've had another question come in about the collaboration that's happening with the juniors in these associations. And so the question comes, or here, let me see if I can read the question. It's a bit long. But every year, this comes from Tim O'Brien, and he works with Working Ranch, and for the past 10 years has worked with the Working Ranch Junior. And every year, he says, we are totally amazed at the focus and ability of our beef production youth through their stories, told through their eyes. And his question is, how impressive was the 2018 Youth Summit, the energy and perspectives of so many young people, and tell us more about the long-term benefit of involving them at this critical stage of their lives.
So I guess I can try. I didn't happen to be at that. So the collaborative efforts in that area have been focused on educational events. So we tend to go to places that have land-grant universities, or at least access to people from land-grant universities. We like to take them, show them some industry things, feedlots, so forth. I don't know if anybody on the call was actually at that particular event, but I think just in general, the idea of collaborating at a very young age and getting across to young people that breed associations and breeds, more specifically breeds, don't need to have walls built around them, which is a fairly, I think, fairly new concept. As I was talking earlier, I think that's a major value in things like that, or we call it the summit. As far as specifically addressing the kind of enthusiasm and so forth, from what I heard secondhand, lots of enthusiasm at that particular event, and we've had others in the past as well. We didn't have one this year because of the virus issue, but yeah, they've been very, very well attended, and I would say the level of enthusiasm would be very, very high.
Thanks, Wade. Tom, do you have anything you want to add to your position on joint youth development and collaboration there?
Right, it's something that we have done some of in the past with ASA, and I think it is tremendous way to build numbers of attending youth, and also, just being able to access different venues, universities, and other industry operations that exposing these kids to at a young age, like Tim said. It changes it changes those kids. I mean, you stretch their minds at a young age when they're maybe still trying to figure out what they're going to do for a career. I mean, it opens doors. I know in some of our youth events, we'll send people to, let's say, a range symposium, and they come back a different person. They find out that's something that they really were interested in and want to pursue, maybe even educationally, and as they go to college that they didn't even know they liked. And so it should be a continued area of emphasis. I think it is for all of us, and the collaborative element just builds it that much stronger.
Thanks, Tom. We've got another one. I might kick back Wade's direction. The question is, and Tom, I know a lot of effort in the Red Angus camp in this area as well. How do we handle data coming in from different breed associations into, that are coming from various formats, maybe various data points, to standardize that for accurate comparisons? How are all the rules from all these different breed associations blended in order to use the information in a genetic evaluation?
So you're saying that, want me to have at that one, Jackie?
Sure.
So, yeah, so I would say a couple of things. One of them is fortunately, we have the Beef Improvement Federation, which is an organization that has been focused on establishing standard guidelines. And to the degree that the various partners follow them, that does help us with standardization. I'm not saying, and even we at ASA have areas where we veer from BIF from time to time in different areas. But it is, I would say this, we're kind of have an ongoing effort amongst the partners. We had last fall, I believe it was September, we had a face-to-face joint meeting of the partners, and that was definitely one of the topics that was brought up and discussed. And it is an ongoing effort to standardize as much as we can, as much as possible. But through statistical methodology, we can still handle things that maybe aren't exactly, or data that isn't exactly the same across all those platforms. Just a simple one is we do Australian, we do work for Australian groups. Of course, that comes in metric, and we convert that. That's fairly straightforward and simple. But they also have they do some things differently over there when it comes to data collection and the traits that they're focused on. And I think we've been fairly effective at working around that, or working with that, and still leveraging information from data sets that maybe aren't exactly right down the pike when it comes to BIF guidelines. But we really do want to adhere as closely as possible to BIF guidelines. And like I say, they provided a very good template in most areas to follow, and that's generally what we use as the train tracks.
Thanks, Wade. We've got a question here that I might kick to Tom to start it off, and it's related to feed intake data and how important we feel collecting individual feed intake data is to improving predictions of profitability, in particular, how it's going into our economic indexes. So, Tom, I know Red Angus has had quite an emphasis on collecting feed intake data, and so what are your thoughts there?
Sure, Jackie. I mean, you might say that really developing intake EPDs and collecting the data that will drive those EPDs is kind of the new frontier. There's unbelievable opportunity to improve feed efficiency in the beef cattle business. And of course, we're going to do that by collecting the grow safe type data and really being able to put good contemporary groups together and collect as much of that information as possible. There is a relationship to growth, of course, that's pretty strong between intake and growth, post-weaning growth. However, we're going to find exceptional animals, just like the birth to growth spread or any other traits that we would consider to be antagonistic and tough to improve simultaneously. But we will find, the more we work on it, we will find those animals that can grow fast and also grow very efficiently and not eat as much feed per pound of gain. I think as we look at where the industry is, we're making good progress. I mean, in Red Angus, we're collecting a lot of records. We have quite a few breeders that every year are turning in that information. We certainly need more. And as do, I'm sure, other breeds as well. We're all kind of probably more or less in the same place in starting to collect that data, building enough of a database to produce the initial EPDs, but needing to continue to deepen the data behind it. And as the group may or may not know that's on the call, we do not have a DMI or intake EPD yet in IGS, but that is one of the high on the list traits to add. We have in Red Angus, we have a single breed DMI, and we look forward to being able to move that into the IGS suite because we know it will have a lot more data behind it. And so that's kind of, I mean, it's an evolving trait. It's one of huge merit. It's one of huge opportunity. And it's one that we need to, as an industry and certainly as a group of IGS breeds, we need to continue to emphasize. And I think it's Wade can speak to this, but I think it's in the top very few in terms of the list of traits that we want to get added to the IGS suite.
Yeah, I echo what Tom says and what you said, Tom. It is in the top of the totem pole, and we certainly now, especially given our collaboration between all of these databases or breed associations, we certainly have enough critical mass to do quite a pretty good job of predicting feed intake. And the other thing, typically when we talk feed intake, we're thinking about feedlot, and obviously that's important, but feed intake in the cow herd is as well. And we do predict. We actually, even without having without using intake data for both feedlot intake and cow herd intake, we're using indicator traits. So we are predicting intake in the feedlot with indicator traits in our index, specifically ASA, for any of you using our indexes. Just wanted you to know that. But we're also predicting cow herd intake, and for as long as I can see into the future, we're always going to have to predict cow herd intake with indicator traits. We're just not going to be able to collect on any broad scale actual intake on cows. Now, we might be able to use some relationships between intake in their progeny in a feedlot, but certainly most of the information when it comes to predicting feedlot or cow herd intake rather is going to be driven by cow size and milk production level. the more accurately we can predict those things, the better gauge we're going to get, you know, on cow herd intake, and that's of course a very critical trait as well. And I think there is potential for genomics to help us in that area, but it is an area that, like I said, we're pretty much relegated to using indicator traits to predict cow herd intake.
Thank you, gentlemen. We've had a question about how genomics and genotypes are incorporated into the EPDs. Wade, do you want to brush on that?
Yeah, so at one time we used what's called what's been dubbed a one-step method in the world of animal breeding, and that differentiates it from the previous method that was basically a two-step method. And it was two-step in that we would run the traditional genetic evaluation using pedigrees and phenotypes and come up with EPDs. And then we would use DNA test results to calculate what we called MBVs, or molecular breeding values. And after the fact, we would blend those two pieces of information and making it a two-step process. Now we are using, as I said, it's been dubbed a one-step process because we're simultaneously solving for pedigree, phenotype, and DNA. And we know that's a much more accurate, or it is definitely more accurate. Much more might be excessive, but it is a more accurate approach to using DNA in genetic prediction. So in the past, I can add a little bit to that too. So in the past, to do the two-step process where we were to calculate molecular breeding values, we would run a training population where that's where we would get an estimate of what the various SNP markers, their effect on a particular trait. And we would have a population of animals that had genotypes and phenotypes to come up with that. And we would do that periodically over time. And it would be basically, if we felt we had a lot of new information, we would what we call retrain. We would re-estimate those effects that the various SNP markers had. Well, now we essentially retrain every week. The way the one-step works and the way our system is working, we are getting updated the most accurate estimates of what those SNP markers, the impact those SNP markers have on a trait. We're getting the most updated possible and most accurate possible predictions of those on a weekly basis because we're running the analysis every week.
You know, Jackie, if I could real quickly here, I want to add maybe it's a little bit of a tangential thought, but it's related, and I think everybody on the call that's a breeder can think about this. I mean, we talk a lot about, as well we should, the genetic evaluation and making it as good as it possibly can be. We're always working to enhance it. As Wade has said, there's always improvements that the IGS science team figures out and ultimately will implement. But from an individual breeder standpoint, I would encourage everybody to think about their own herds and building accuracy into those genetic predictions within their own herds. And maybe you haven't really thought about that, but you can do it through a number of different ways. And probably the most simple ways to do that building EPD accuracy, better predictability into your own herd is by genotyping as many animals as possible. That gives the evaluation more information on your cattle that it can evaluate. And then, of course, very, very important is to turn in as many phenotypic records on as many different traits as you possibly can, and being willing to work maybe a little bit harder at that. You literally can, within the entire pool of the genetic evaluation of IGS, you can make your portion of that in your herd more accurate by doing those things. And I think we're always going to be working on the genetic evaluation to make it as good as we possibly can. But there's always going to be weak spots within that evaluation where the data is thin. And so you can make sure that your herd, the data is deep, it's accurate, there's as many genotypes in that pool of information as possible. That is going to strengthen the analysis, the evaluation's ability to analyze your cattle in your herd and spit back out EPDs that have greater accuracy. We measure that through accuracy of those EPDs, but you can even think of it in a little broader terms. And so that's kind of the challenge to all seed stock breeders. I realize it's a tall task and it's a lot of work. It takes commitment to data, collecting that information, organizing it, getting it sent in to your breed association. But it does truly build the accuracy and deepen the data and improve the evaluation's ability to analyze your cattle. And so that, as we talk about different parts of the analysis, I think we can encourage everybody on the call that's a breeder to start to think about that within their own herds, and we encourage you to do that.
Amen. Amen. And I've always said that genetic evaluation really is a team sport, and it's even become more so with the advent of DNA, because the more phenotypes and genotypes we can get collected, the more it raises everyone's votes. The thing that has concerned us over time is that people will look at DNA, or breeders will look at DNA as a silver bullet and kind of an easy route, a lazy man's approach to genetic evaluation, but we need phenotypes as much as ever, if not more. So absolutely, rounding up phenotypes is critical. We need to push the envelope as much as we can in that area. And of course, if you're able to pull genotypes on those animals, it's very, very beneficial to you, like Tom said, to you as a breeder and everybody. It helps everyone.
I guess another question we've had that's along these lines is, in this era where we have more and more genomic information coming in, is it still valuable to collect ultrasound information?
You want to answer that, Tom, or?
Well, I'll give him the quick answer and you can give him the real answer, Wade, okay? The short answer is yes, it is, because as Wade just mentioned, we need as many phenotypic records as we possibly can, and that makes every genotype that's submitted worth more because we can relate it back to phenotypic records. So that's all I'll say, and Wade, you could take it from there if you would.
Yeah, I mean, you're on the money, and one of the struggles in that area is we don't have, when it comes to, in a perfect world, we would collect carcass data just like we collect weight trait data. And if that were the case, no, we wouldn't need ultrasound data. We would have the actual trait data on the actual trait. But given the fact that we have a relatively small amount of carcass data compared to the size of our population, and I'm not just saying we at IGS, it's just a general problem in the industry, or it's a conundrum. The collection of ultrasound data still has value. Now, I know some have seen that when you run a DNA test, because it's equivalent to, say, 6, 8 carcass records, there is a tendency to think, well, gee, you know, I don't need to, and you're not going to see, because it's equivalent to 6, 8 carcass records, you're not going to see the ultrasound move your predictions or your EPDs around much like it did in the past. But that doesn't mean that that information, that ultrasound information, doesn't have value. So yes, it does have value. We could, in a perfect world, it wouldn't, because we would have all the carcass data we needed flowing in, but we're certainly not at that level. But I would really encourage any organization that has the inclination to do whatever it takes to get carcass data collected, because carcass data is the king. Ultrasound data is, unfortunately, it's an indicator trait. It's not the actual trait. So carcass data is king. So if you have the inclination as a breeder or as an organization, figure out a way to get carcass data.
Thank you, gentlemen. So we just keep getting a string of questions, so I hope you don't mind if we keep going. We've had a few questions
They just
more
want
about.
to extend the happy hour, Jackie.
What's that?
They just want to extend the happy hour.
I know. My beverage is empty. I might have to find another one. One of the questions is more general about IGS and how organizations might become a part of IGS. And are there organizations outside of North America that are in IGS?
Yeah, there are. We have the Australian Shorthorn Association, and there are a few others. They're actually a full partner, and they have been publishing IGS calculated EPDs. And there are a few other organizations in Australia and New Zealand that are we're in the process of doing some beta testing. So there is international interest, and of course international, we have many Canadian associations, and we always think of Canada, or I'm guilty of thinking Canada is just another part of the US, or well, that's
what happens when you're from North Dakota and Minnesota?
I see Canada as just, you know, more states, but they of course are international, and we have, you know, a number, and I don't want to cast aspersions by saying Canada is just part of the US. I know a lot of Canadians wouldn't like that, given all the stuff we go through down here, but anyway, yeah, we have certainly a number of Canadian associations. So I think the first part of the question was how do you get involved? Well, you can go through, if you're an individual breeder, you know, there's several portals, different breed associations to go through. I believe most of the partners have an open herd book, so they're not limited by breed. And the other option, if you're an organization, is to come in as a partner and run your organization's data, your collective data through our system and become part of IGS system. With we provide a portal to any independent partners. We provide a portal that allows them to upload their data on a weekly basis. Any new data that comes in over the span of a week gets uploaded and gets incorporated into the evaluation.
Thanks, Wade. I've got one that I think maybe we'd start with Tom. There's a question about, from a commercial producer's perspective, how does IGS benefit them? And this question comes from somebody who's collecting from birth to carcass data on their commercial operations for 10 years and making bull selections and replacement heifer selections. Can IGS help them even more?
Yeah, and Wade may want to add to this in terms of the possibility of maybe actually using some of that data in the genetic evaluation itself. But I think the big ones, the easy ones there that we can very much claim is that IGS, as Wade outlined in his presentation, there's a massive amount of data there, second to none in terms of the available data, and data is power. Data means more accuracy. And so that in itself is very beneficial to the commercial producer who is using bulls of any of the breeds involved in IGS, because they are getting really a slice of that powerful database every time they buy a bull that has IGS generated EPDs. And so, and to go right with that, of course, would be that those EPDs are on the same base. And so if I'm using IGS breeds in a crossbreeding program within my commercial operation, then of course I really don't have to learn a lot of different bases or make calculated adjustments in any of the EPDs one to the other. And so the convenience factor is very strong. We've used the example, just a quick example. Let's say that I'm a commercial producer that's crossbreeding Red Angus and Simmental. Maybe I'm from the state of Kansas, which is my home state, so I'll use that as an example. And I've decided that I really want my milk EPDs to be between 18 and 23, just to pick some numbers. That's my targeted range. Well, I can, whether I'm using Red Angus bulls, Sim Angus bulls, Simmental bulls in my crossbreeding program, I can literally target that same range in all of those different breeds, because they're all of the milk EPDs coming out of IGS for those breeds is on the same base. I can target that range. I can stay in that range regardless of the breed of bull I'm using. That's a real convenience factor, and it just helps me kind of target if I'm trying to optimize milk in that range. It helps me target that range and be consistent without really having to do a lot of analytics to get there. So those are a couple of very important things. I think that, and I'll turn it over to Wade here after this statement, I think that we are on the cusp of utilizing more commercial data in our genetic evaluations. Wade spoke to the need for more carcass data. And one of the ways that we are going to get it, I think, in IGS and in the IGS breeds in the future is to partner with commercial producers that have that data and even go seek it out. I mean, for us at Red Angus, is to seek out those yellow tag cattle that can be sire identified and probably ultimately use that information in the IGS genetic evaluation. So I think that partnership between the breeds and the associations and the commercial producers and utilizing that data is already getting stronger and stronger. And so we want to keep building bridges that direction. Wade, what would you add to that?
Well, I think you're right on the money there, Tom. I would say that well, there's no doubt that adding commercial data in the system doesn't differentiate commercial versus non if we have pedigree and phenotype and even genotype. Commercial producers certainly can collect genotypes, and a number of them are. It's going to benefit them as well as the entire system and the industry ultimately. I would say this, that if you are a commercial producer and you're keeping bulls, you're selecting bulls from within your herd, you're a seed stock breeder. And so then it's imperative that you collect phenotype and even genotype. But I would also say, even if you're not doing that, even if you're not selecting bulls, you're certainly selecting heifers. for your replacement pen. And if you have gone through the effort of keeping track of pedigree and actually measuring animals, collecting phenotypes, you cannot do any better than using that information along with genotypes. You could not get a better prediction. It's going to be more accurate than simply getting a genotype. And I know for most commercial producers, they don't know pedigrees. They don't bother to collect any commercial or any phenotypes. And so in that case, yeah, genotyping is really all that's the only tool available to them to get at genetic differences and sift through their heifers. But if you have the information, if you're actually going through the work of collecting the phenotypes and you know the pedigrees, you're going to get more accurate prediction by going through a system like IGS. You're going to make better decisions ultimately because you have better information.
Thank you, gentlemen. We've had some other questions come in about more selection decisions and weighing the difference between selecting on EPDs versus indexes, or if you have a suite of indexes, do you focus on terminal traits? Do you focus on maternal or terminal indexes versus maternal indexes? So do you want to walk through your advice or how you have conversations with breeders about helping them see how much selection pressure to put on all the various options they have available to them?
I guess I can start. That's a loaded question. Obviously, really when you talk about selecting on indexes versus EPDs, it really isn't that, because indexes are a composite of EPDs. They simply weight based on some structured mathematics. And incorporating prices and cost with genetics. I always call indexes genetic accounting. They use EPDs to come up with a prediction of profit, and there really isn't any question in the animal breeding world that indexes are what a producer should be using. Both seed stock and commercial producer should be using to make selection decisions. We know there's a whole array of traits that impact profit, and to somehow put the proper weighting on those traits basically by the seat of your pants is just not possible. And indexes, as I said, have been accepted as the holy grail for selection by virtually all of our competitors in meat animal species competitors, maybe not sheep so much, but certainly the other competitors. And we know that by using indexes, if they're properly constructed, you're going to make more progress in the trait that is the most relevant of all, and that's profit. And that's for most of us, that's why we're in the business. Now, as far as what indexes you use, that's dependent on your scenario. If you are a seed stock breeder, you have to determine how your customers are going to use your bulls. If they're going to keep replacement females, you certainly don't want to focus on a terminal index. However, if you're selling bulls to someone that's going to send all their, or your customers are going to send them all to town or at least they're going to be put in the feedlot, then you obviously need to be using the terminal index. And in many cases, if you're a seed stock breeder, you're going to have some of both. And so it probably makes sense to maybe have distribute the selection, in proportion to what proportion you're selling. If 30% of the bulls that you're selling are being used as terminal sires, then you should have a strain in your herd that is geared towards that. You're using a terminal index, and the remainder, then, if they're keeping replacement females, would be using more of an all-around index that would encompass all of the traits that impact the cow herd or beef profitability.
Maybe a couple additional thoughts there. And indexes, the way Wade answered that is tremendous. I mean, they really are the route to multi-trait genetic progress, which is what most of us really are trying to achieve, right? We're trying to do a lot of things at once. There's many traits that are important in beef cattle, maternal, and the beef traits or the terminal traits. And most of us are trying to make progress in all of those simultaneously, which is a very hard task. And the indexes put that in a perspective that can help us tremendously. When I think about index selection, and this would apply to commercial breeders, certainly to seed stock breeders, there's kind of three different approaches. One would be almost an index only approach. Probably very few people really do that, but they could. They could look at an index and put huge emphasis, put basically all their emphasis on that, and know that if they're using the index of interest, as Wade described, they're going to be making multi-trait genetic progress in the direction they want to go. The second approach might be a slight offshoot of that, where you really put heavy emphasis on the index, but you're looking maybe at a couple EPDs just for some fine tuning. The classic example might be, I'm looking at an overall index, which in Red Angus is herd builder, in Simmental is the API, and you would look at that index, you would heavily weight that index in your decision making. But maybe if you're breeding heifers, you're going to certainly look at the calving ease EPD and put some good emphasis on that. So heavy emphasis on the index, some minor emphasis or fine tuning on the EPDs. And then the other, going a little further that direction, you might find a seed stock breeder, maybe a fairly advanced seed stock breeder, that is going to look at the indexes, and that's going to be part of their decision making, but they're really looking at quite a few EPDs because they're really trying to fine tune. Maybe it's AI matings where they're really trying to match mate and make balanced or complementary progress, or they're just going to do more analysis. They want to take more time and really analyze the EPDs. But in all those cases, I think, as Wade said, the indexes should play a very significant role, because that's where that puts the pieces together. I like your term, Wade, genetic accounting. It puts the EPDs together in a logical, economic manner that is going to be better than any of our guesses just looking at the EPD package, bull to bull or mating to mating. And so we can make more progress using those indexes. And so we do encourage everybody to use them and put a significant amount of weight on those indexes when they're making their breeding decisions.
Yeah, and I would add this too, Tom. And this might sound kind of funny coming from me, because I tend to be very fixated on the indexes, but I sold bulls, so I know you also have to have a handle on marketability, and that needs to be part of your decision making, even along with the index. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. Used to use a bull that on the index I was using had very high value, very high economic value. But the cattle were generally quite unattractive. They weren't particularly high growth cattle, but as I said, they were high profit cattle, and I have no doubt that they truly were. However, because I had trouble selling the bulls, it really didn't do me a lot of good, and those bulls, because they were difficult to sell, you can have the best genes in the world, or the most profitable genes in the world, but if you can't get the animals sold for whatever reason, they're not going to do anybody any good. So there's always a bit of practicality in marketing, and I think growth is one of the areas that is very provides a very good illustration. We know that there are many commercial producers that absolutely won't use a bull unless he has a certain level of growth. And so, yeah, there might be some bulls with quite a bit less growth that ring the bell for profit, and they probably truly do. But if they're not marketable, you probably, as far as a seed stock breeder, a commercial breeder is a different story. But if you're a seed stock breeder, you've got to market those bulls. And if for whatever reason they're not going to be marketable, you probably need to steer clear.
Thank you, gentlemen. We've had another interesting question that I think you both would have some history with and have some thoughts on how best to handle it. The question is, how do you deal with seed stock breeders who openly talk against, quote unquote, the numbers? That, we have some vocal people that are on social media or are prominent in the industry who are not believers in EPDs and indexes. So what approach would you two gentlemen have with those scenarios?
Want to hit that one, Tom?
I can start on that one. I think it is unfortunate because EPDs have been proven to work. Are they perfect, or are they always visible in a herd? No. And sometimes I think because EPDs have been around for a while and our science keeps getting better and that kind of thing, so we know we've proven in Red Angus that the IGS bolt generated EPDs are the best EPDs we've ever had in the Red Angus breed. We've documented that through a host of validations and proofs over the last 2 or so years. But the problem is we have some lowly heritable traits. Milk would be a good example. Stayability would be another one. And those traits, because they're heavily environmentally influenced, they're hard to see in a given herd. And other traits are easier to see, like growth sometimes is easier to see. Certainly calving ease is visible. If you have a problem, you know that. So there's some variation in terms of heritability that plays into what a given breeder can visualize versus really not see until the data is aggregated. The other thing that we always have to remind ourselves of, two other things. One is the accuracy of those EPDs. Lower accuracy EPDs are just that. They aren't as accurate. And so the predictability of that animal's genetic performance is still more in question than a higher accuracy EPD. But equally important is variation is a part of biology, right? We all know that. There's variation in all biological elements of our business. And we have to keep that in mind. And so, again, we may have a heavy birth weight calf out of a calving ease sire. That sticks in our mind, even though it was just an outlier. And if you look at groups of animals, of course, the EPDs are working. And so it's a forest versus a tree kind of thing. And we want to keep our focus on the forest because that's really the overall population genetics overall within the herd, within the contemporary group perspective. And so it's when people criticize EPDs, I think the thing to do, number one, have them talk to somebody that's knowledgeable at a breed association. And we have lots of data, and I think we're doing a better job all the time in validating that EPDs are working. But it's also important, again, to have some of that fundamental education about Mendelian inheritance, which means variation essentially, and inheritance even of the same mating. We all have, those of us that have kids, you know, we see variation in our kids from the same parents, same thing. We also have accuracies that needs to be considered. Group sizes, larger group sizes, of course, are going to be more reflective of actual EPD differences versus smaller sample sizes. And so I think a lot of the lingering criticism, if you will, that EPDs get are from forgetting maybe some of those basic elements that if we just go back through and kind of rebuild the case, it makes a lot of sense. And you know, you can't EPD your way out of variation in a biological system, but you can influence the direction of all the traits that we measure, and that's the powerful and important thing. And so I guess we hope that with more validations and those kinds of things that we can put in front of people, that will really put a dent in that kind of thinking. Wade?
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything to add to that. I know there has been quite a bit of validation, well, just on EPDs in general over many decades. And there really is no question that they are the most effective way to determine an animal's genetic level for any trait they're actually applied to. I think what happens sometimes, I think you alluded to it, you hit it square on, Tom, that like sometimes we tend to pass judgment on what we see in front of us, and we might try a bull and we might get 10, 20 calves out of the bull. Well, that's a small sample set. That same bull might have, you know, another 1,000 calves across the country, or at least hundreds of calves spread around the country. And EPDs collect all that information, or they assimilate all that information. And so you're certainly going to, and they do it in a manner that is statistically unbiased and yields, you know, the most accurate prediction possible given the information you have. And again, just like, you know, we talk about indexes, seat of your pants versus applying mathematical methodology or the statistical methodology that has been tried and true and stood the test of time and scrutiny by many scientists. You know, you just know that there's no question. Now, I understand that many people question it, but they don't. In the beef industry, for some reason, there tends to be more questioning, and maybe because there's more environmental variation or whatever reason, I don't know for sure. But they certainly don't, I think, in some of the other species that we compete with, the pig and the poultry, especially there, and dairy. Not that they're competing with us from a beef standpoint, but they certainly, all those species are very tuned in on the use of EPDs and very just not questioned in those species.
I guess we've got 3 questions that are all centered around feed efficiency and feed intake. And I'll do my best to kind of gather them into a few concepts. So one of the questions is measuring feed intake data in feedlot with terminal calves the same as getting at cow herd intake efficiency. And along with that, what are the best ways to measure or select for efficient cows that do well grazing grass?
I guess I kind of spoke to that indirectly, so I'll take a shot at it. Earlier I spoke to it. So when it comes to cows, well, there has been some work. I'll speak to the first part. Are they the same trait? Cow herd intake and feedlot intake? No, they're definitely not the same trait. Is there some relationship? Is there some genetic relationship between them? Appears to be to some degree. There's been some studies. It's a difficult area, frankly, because it's hard to get actual cow herd intake, especially in a normalized situation where they're actually grazing. And the studies are kind of all across the board. There's some that show that, yeah, that relationship is actually fairly reasonably strong, all the way to there is no relationship, or even it goes in the opposite direction. I believe I've seen some studies that would illustrate that. But when it comes to cow herd intake, I think we're always going to be sure we might, if there in fact is, we can establish that there is a reasonable relationship between cow herd intake and feedlot intake. We can use feedlot intake as a predictor or as a indicator trait to help predict, just kind of like we use birth weight to help predict calving age. However, I think we're always going to be relegated when it comes to cow herd intake, what a cow eats, which is a very important trait. The intake of your cow herd is probably the largest expense you have in a production system. But we're always going to be relegated, at least as far as I can foresee, to using indicator traits. And the two big ones are the size of the cow and the milk production level of the cow. And actually, there's some research, mainly in dairy, because it's easier to do, that show that if you have a handle on those two traits, cow size and cow milk production, you can do a pretty good job of predicting cow herd intake genetically. Genetic levels of, if you have a good handle on genetic level of intake, or genetic mature weight or weight and size and milk production, you can do a pretty good job of predicting genetic cow herd intake. And I think that's pretty much, and that we can use, of course, leverage genomics to help shore up those predictions, particularly in younger animals. But yeah, that's just an area as important as it is. It's just sad to say that we're just probably going to always be relegated to cow herd intake's always going to be relegated to using indicator traits to predict.
Just to quickly underscore that last couple comments that Wade made, I mean, the best proxy or indicator trait that we have would be cow size and milk, because those are directly, at least on the cow itself. Dry matter intake, as we measure today, is more correlated to a different ration and a different phase of production. We're talking about, with the cow, we're talking about probably a mature animal or a nearly mature animal. In the case of DMI, we're talking about measuring that in terms of a feedlot setting on a younger animal that's growing. And so it is going to be an indicator trait that will have to be used as a proxy, because we don't measure cow intake, or we haven't, as Wade said, that we haven't really been able to do that. It's hard to do in a broad sense, in a deep data sense, you might say. But thinking about cow size and also lactation, that's going to be a much better proxy overall than a DMI type EPD or trait.
Thank you, gentlemen. You're doing so good on these questions, and we really had a slug of questions roll through, and we're learning a lot. So we've had a couple of other questions centered around EPD movement. One is about EPDs moving from week to week, and how do you advise breeders handle that fluidness? But related to that is, how do you explain EPD movement between full sibs that are ET calves that have, similar, they're calved in a similar time frame in a similar herd, and you start to see EPD movement or separation between those animals? I guess it's kind of two questions. One is just EPD movement from week to week, and the second is, how do you explain EPD movement on ET calves born in a very similar time frame with similar weights?
Hey, Wade, if I might, let me take the first one because it's easier, and you can take the hard one, okay? The movement in EPDs week to week, we understand is sometimes a challenge for people because they do change. But a couple comments on that. Number one, I think after having had weekly EPDs now for a while, most of us would not go back to having them, a couple times a year, having those updates, because we know that the analysis that is updating weekly is updating with new data. And so we're adding incremental accuracy every single week to those animals whose EPDs are changing. It may be from peripheral family members who had genotypes come in or data come in. It may be in a breed that is not your breed. If it's a red Angus bull that moves, it might be because of data that came in from a Sim Angus breeder or a balancer breeder. And so there's some things that are happening behind the scenes that we may not always see, but the analysis is literally getting smarter every week. And so when you see those EPDs change, please keep in mind that they are moving closer and closer and closer to the truth, to the underlying genetic truth. And so that's a good thing to keep in mind. I would also say, don't get too worried about little moves. Sometimes we see people, I think Ryan Bolt, who's our geneticist on staff, would say this, is sometimes we see people that get kind of concerned about a 1 pound move or just little moves. And they're the kind of folks that it's great because they care about EPDs, they emphasize that they're using the tools. But I think sometimes we can lean quite a ways over toward maybe being concerned about small moves. And I would encourage people not to do that too much. And again, to keep in mind that when those EPDs change, it's because of information that has been added, and there's incrementally more accurate information that's behind those EPDs, and that's why they did move.
So I'll speak then to how do you explain the differences that we see or movement in what I presume are full sibs, ET flush mates that would be full sibs. And I think it's unfortunate. I think it's a fairly common perception that or it is a fairly common reaction amongst some when they see differences between highly related animals, full sibs and so forth. They implicate EPDs. There's something wrong that shouldn't happen. Well, actually, full siblings only have half of their segregating genes in common, and that's on the average. Some of them have more than half in common, and some of them less. And in fact, in research where you start getting under the hood genomically, we can find that they can be extremely, we can have full sibs that have a very large number of segregating genes in common, and we can have full sibs that have very few. And just from a practical standpoint, we all know some AI sires that were full siblings, and over time, after massive amounts of data are collected, they end up extremely different. One can be extremely high for cavings and the other a cow killer. And that's certainly all biologically very, very explainable and very common. That's what we would expect. So yeah, and now we're seeing right out of the gate with genomics. In the past, it would take a fair bit of time to get much of a gauge in between differences in full sibs, because well, at one time we weren't using even using phenotypic data on them themselves. We would use it on their offspring, but our system wasn't set up to use phenotypic data. We are now. We can use phenotypic data and are using it on ET calves. So that does differentiate them some coming out of the gate, but of course genomics can dramatically differentiate them at a very early age. And of course, ultimately, the ultimate test is if they have lots and lots of progeny. And as I said, if you have a set of full sibs that have lots and lots of progeny, it isn't uncommon. You're going to see some traits where they differ dramatically. So the differing of full sibs is very expected, and as I said, now we can do it at an earlier age than we could before because of through the use of genomics.
Thank you, gentlemen. And a comment has come in along those lines, and it makes me smile. But you know, if EPDs do not move with the addition of new data, then there's no need to send in new data, right? I mean, so this is something that we hear, and I appreciate, and I can sympathize with changes in our evaluation and changes from week to week as new data comes in, that there's some anxiety that comes along with that change. And but the reality is we expect it to change, right? And if it doesn't change, then what's the point of making improvements to the evaluation or sending in more information? So the change is a good thing. It's helping us sharpen that information and get it closer to the reality of the true breeding value. So I appreciate those thoughts. We did have another question centered around what IGS is doing for health traits. Wade, do you want to tackle that one?
Well, I guess it's fair to say, actually, Jackie, let's have you answer that one, because Jackie, though she is a reproductive physiologist by training, she has become a somewhat of an armchair geneticist. She sits in on all of our meetings and has become quite proficient, and she's very, very involved in what's going on at IGS. So I think she can summarize what's going on in the area of health as well as any of us.
What do you think, Wade? I feel like you just passed the hard one. And I will say, I'm an animal breeder, but the one that wears the long sleeve, not the one that understands all the statistical methods. So, yeah, health traits is an area of interest, it's also a tough nut to crack. And so I guess one of the big questions is, what does health mean? And how are you going to measure it? And there's a lot of various answers to that. Are we talking about BRD? Are we talking about mortality in feedlots? Are we talking about cows that end up being culled from the herd prematurely? What does health mean? And so there's a few fronts that IGS is plowing forward on. We have recently developed a PAP EPD and are continuing to invest resources to improve the PAP EPD, but also encourage breeders to submit the PAP measurements. And so that is an area that we're working on, and we're also working to improve. We're also just recently have some feet and leg guidelines to start collecting feet and leg data. So, to try and capture animals that maybe aren't as structurally sound or get removed from the herd earlier on than expected. I am a student of Wade Shafer's, though, and one of the things that I've learned from Wade is to try and focus on traits that are economically viable or economically impactful to the breeders. And so one of the things that we do have in our corner is that we do have stay predictions. And so while there might be a lot of reasons why an animal is culled from the herd, the main reason is that they're culled from the herd. And that's the main thing that's going to impact the profitability of those genetics, is whether or not they're able to do their job, stay and reproduce and have a calf and stay the next year and reproduce and have a calf and keep doing that over and over and over again. And no matter what the reason is that inhibits that animal from staying and reproducing and having a calf, that's really ultimately the metric that we're after. There are absolutely some other health traits that are outside of that, in particular, with terminal cattle and some feedlot health traits. We are working towards trying to figure out how to measure those traits and collect those traits. But stayability is really a good one to have in your back pocket when we're talking about the cow herd and the economic drivers of a commercial operation. And that also ties into, we did have not a question, but a kudos to the IGS group on the stay EPD, and says, those of us trying to make better mama cows sure appreciate the tool. So thank you for those comments. Wade, I don't know if you have, or Tom, if you have any other ideas surrounding the health topic.
No, I just add that it's basically a tough nut to crack. As time goes on, I think we'll I guess zero in and leverage the available information to attempt to make some prediction in that area. Right now, it's just, we're a ways away from, as the industry really is, from getting a very good toehold on things there.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that's maybe a nice spot to bring this to a close. And I would echo some of the information that was stated earlier about there's all kinds of work being done to improve traits, to develop new traits, to to continue to improve this multi-breed genetic evaluation that we have at IGS. It's easy to look at that and feel a little overwhelmed. And what I would encourage, if anybody is still on and listening, actually we still have 47 people on and listening, is zero in on your part. Think about what you can do to continue to improve the genetic evaluation, to continue to submit accurate information into the genetic evaluation, to continue to send in complete groups of animals, records on the entire contemporary group, not just the top 10 or not just the ones that you're going to register. Try and send in the complete information. Try and genotype as many animals as you can. And all of that helps make the genetic evaluation better. And in the meantime, the IGS science team and the staff involved in the IGS genetic evaluation, they're also going to be cranking that wheel and doing the best that they can to continue to improve traits and develop new traits. But if we can rally this entire group to make the data going in better, make the data going in more complete, make it more accurate, and at the same time, we're cranking on the science and the methodology and what we can do to add traits and make the traits better, then we're going to come out of this with a really awesome evaluation. And, we're there now. We'll just constantly be working to improve it. We're not going to be satisfied with saying the evaluation today is the best we're going to have. It's the best we have today, but we're going to keep working to just constantly push it and do better and do better. So with that, I would like to thank everybody who has joined us. I really appreciate all the questions, and thank our honorable speakers, Dr. Wade Shafer, thank you so much, and Tom Brink, thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys taking your time to visit with us tonight, and we're getting lots of kudos through the Q&A box in the GoToWebinar, so thank you, gentlemen. We will do this again July 16th, Thursday, July 16th at 5 p.m. Mountain. And the whole focus of that talk will be what can breeders do to do the best they can with submitting data and collecting data. So looking forward to that talk, and thank you, everybody. We'll make these available on the International Genetic Solutions website. And if you have any questions, look us up, give us a call, send us an email. We're happy to answer them. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.